Okay, Jonathan, so the meeting is being recorded and it's being streamed on YouTube.
All right, pull up my script. All right, give me a second. I'm trying to pull up the script really quick. So
No problem.
all right, so hello everyone and welcome to our October 26th Social Justice Task Force meeting. I will now call this meeting to order. Based on the people that I see, Marcus, can I ask you to recite the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, Jasmine will display it on the screen, just so you know.
Okay. Right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Makes me smile every time I hear that. That's great. So, with that said, we're going to do roll call. Jasmine, do you want to go ahead and lead us on roll call?
Sure. Okay, Jonathan Wilson,
Here.
Daniel Zamilpa,
Here.
Marcus Smith,
Here.
Krupa Desai,
Here.
Giselle Washington,
Here.
Shayla Demure,
Here.
Alexander Moore. Sorry, there's someone who actually, yeah, Jorge just joined. Shannon Morton. I don't think I see Shannon, but I know Jorge is here. Yeah, we can give him a second to get settled, but I'll mark him as present.
Yep. That's fair. All right. So then with that said, why don't we go ahead and do approval of minutes? So let's do a vote for approval of minutes. Anybody want to?
Motion to approve the minutes, Zamilpa.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to do a vote verbally, and then we'll do a roll call vote as well. So, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, perfect. So, Jasmine, do you want to go ahead and do the roll call vote as well?
Sure. Jonathan Wilson,
Yay.
Daniel Zamilpa,
Aye.
Marcus Smith,
Aye.
Krupa Desai,
Aye.
Giselle Washington,
Aye.
Shayla Demure, Jorge Sephiroth.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Well, thank you for that. In terms of public comment, so at this stage, we are in stage 5 of our agenda, if you're following along at home. This time is set aside for public comment. The public is given the opportunity to address the Social Justice Task Force on any item within its responsibility. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Social Justice Task Force cannot take action on items not listed on the posted agenda. Each speaker will be allotted 2 minutes, and time may be limited or increased based on the discretion of the task force. This public comment period is to address the Social Justice Task Force on agenda items and/or items of general interest within the jurisdiction of the Social Justice Task Force. If there's anyone who didn't sign up to speak and wishes to provide comment, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. For those that did sign up to speak, Jasmine, do you want to go ahead and help us with that?
Sure. I didn't get any emails about public comment for this evening.
Okay.
And I don't see any folks waiting in the queue, nor do I see any hands raised. So,
right. So if you'd like to speak, I'll pause for a minute so you can raise your hand on the virtual Zoom feature. There's on the bottom in the menu bar. All right, let's go ahead and continue on then. We'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda. At this point, we're going to hear from the City of West Hollywood's Strategic Initiatives Division on the following. First, we'll hear about the annual report on the LA County Lesbian, Bisexual, and Queer Women's Health Collaborative. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the West Hollywood staff.
Hi, good evening, task force members and staff. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I'm Corey Plank. I'm the manager of the city's Strategic Initiatives Division. And tonight I'm joined by Diane Kahn-Epstein and Elizabeth Anderson, who are program administrators in the division. As you can see from your agenda, we've got 3 significant items, and we are going to try to give you just a quick overview of the LA County Lesbian, Bisexual, and Queer Women's Health Collaborative, a brief presentation on the city's Aging in Place initiative, and then our kind of focus this evening is really to share information with you and then gather feedback from you on the proposed development of a behavioral health crisis response team for the City of West Hollywood. So I will try to do the 2-minute version of the Lesbian Health Collaborative and then be happy to answer any questions that you have. So you have the report in your packet that kind of details a little bit more of the history and the work of the collaborative. But in a very brief overview, the city is one of the co-conveners and a funder of a collaborative body, the LA County Lesbian, Bisexual, and Queer Women's Health Collaborative. And that group includes folks from the LGBT Center, from the Iris Cancer Center at UCLA for Women's Health Education and Research, the LA County Department of Women's Health, or the Office of Women's Health within the Department of Public Health, as well as practitioners in the medical field, academics, and others who come together and have created a curriculum to provide trainings to healthcare providers, administrators, and also to provide community-based trainings and conversations, workshops, all designed to increase access to healthcare, but also cultural competency within healthcare settings for LBQ women. So over the last year, as you know, everything has been transitioned to virtual, and healthcare providers were certainly more in demand than they had ever been before. And still the collaborative was able to have time with various providers, and you can see the list in the report, everything from providers at Planned Parenthood to the Venice Family Clinic. And then within those, in addition to those programs, we also created some very,
if don't feel rushed on the first item. I know that you said that you want to speak to that briefly. We're open to it, so don't feel rushed. I think the other piece is the aging in place is probably one of the least biggest issues for the BIPOC community. But the other 2, don't feel rushed.
Okay, perfect. And so one of the, I think, really important pieces of the work this year was creating special workshops that were addressing LBQ women of color that are considered sexual minority, members of sexual minority communities. So there were a couple of online sessions conducted by our trainers that we work with for all these trainings. Many of those women are women of color who provide the trainings. And one was the intersection of Black Lives Matter, social justice, COVID-19, and LBQ women. And then there was also one caring for LBQ, queer women's health, and then another workshop on building resilience among LBQ women of color. And so that's really been kind of the focus of the work. One of the researchers within the collaborative also is an academic and was created one of the COVID hesitancy research studies on LBQ women and wanted to specifically look at women of color within that subset as well. And so the collaborative provided technical assistance and support for her work in that area as well. Certainly, something that was really very pressing over the last, now 18, 19 months. And so that's really the work of the collaborative. The city was one of the co-creators of this group. And it's one of the best meetings that we get to have, really smart, caring, compassionate, knowledgeable people. And so just wanted to share this with you. We share this report on an annual basis with the Lesbian Gay Advisory Board and with the City Council and the Human Services Commission. And we thought this year that you would be a good group for us to share this with as well. And so I'll stop there and then happy to answer any questions you may have.
So within the report, we were able to see some of the objectives, but we weren't able to see necessarily some of the tangible activities that you've done to date. And maybe that's just poor reading on my part. I will take that if that's the case, but I would love to learn about some of the things that you've done this year.
So on page 1, the list of agencies and institutions, those are all the places that we provided trainings to this year. And so we have the city helps, the part that we fund is we pay the trainers. I think that's also an important thing to note, that oftentimes people are asked to volunteer their time for these kind of things and not compensated. And that was something we wanted to make sure that we would be able to compensate the trainers. It's not the money that's going to pay the rent, but at least there is a stipend in an ongoing way for those trainers. So we've conducted all of these sessions. So everything from Planned Parenthood, again, to UCLA, they provided 2 specific trainings to the OBGYN clinic. And the conversations are really about what are the forms when you do an intake? How do you address sexual orientation? And we do raise issues around gender identity in those conversations, but we're also careful that we're not the experts on trans women's health. And so we know that we have access and can connect people to other resources for those conversations. But we talk about, everything from how you come into a space. Is it welcoming? What do the visuals in the space look like? What are your forms? What kind of questions, particularly in an OBGYN clinic, what kind of questions do you ask? How do you ask about things like birth control? And for women who are not having sex with men, it's a question that sometimes people have felt apprehensive about answering for fear of discrimination from the healthcare provider. So we have all of the conversations kind of from how you enter, the waiting room and the forms to the actual conversations when you're in the exam room with a physician. And so we have all those conversations. And then with the administrators, we've done trainings with CEDARS, with USC Keck, UCLA, to have conversations with the administrators about your policies. Do you have policies that are welcoming to your staff, as well as patients, the people who are visiting patients, and access by non-traditional family members. And so I don't like to call it non-traditional, but that's what they call it. So I think, looking at family members that haven't often been recognized as family and making sure there's access to visit people and to be with people in emergency rooms or, in recovery rooms and other spaces where family members would traditionally be. So a lot of those conversations, that work is connected to the Health Equity Index from the Human Rights Campaign, and making sure that some of those agencies know how to fill out the questionnaires to get the rating from the Health Equity Index, so that they can put up the signage, they can put it on their website. If you're looking for a physician or a healthcare provider, if they have that kind of seal, that's kind of the kind of broader LGBTQ health, good seal, good housekeeping seal of approval, for lack of any better way to phrase it. But it kind of indicates in a different way than just, rainbow flags or other things that people might put up, that they have policies in place, practitioners in place, that would make members of our community feel comfortable accessing service there.
That's excellent. Daniel, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask a question as well? You're on mute.
There we go. Hi, my name is Daniel. I use he, they pronouns. Thank you so much, Corey, for walking us through this. I just have a couple questions as it relates to, the way that this particular health collaborative is the language that's used within it. I know it's included, queer women is specifically stated. However, there are people who are non-binary, gender non-conforming, who may have, at one point been identified at that, who may still fall medically under that category. I would just suggest maybe exploring, just expanding that language. I know that was noted here under the history, so it's something that has been done in the past. I'm sure, maybe just would consider doing that again in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Of course.
Excellent. Any other questions from our team? All right. Turn it back to you, Corey and Diane.
Great. So, so our division, I think we've shared with you when we came earlier this year, oversees the city's homeless initiative, efforts to reduce poverty, aging in place, and then the LGBTQ Women's Health Collaborative. And so on an annual basis, there's a 5-year strategic plan for aging in place. On an annual basis, we evaluate the progress toward the goals in that plan, and we come and report to various boards and commissions as well as the city council. We wanted to share this with you as well, and we'll have an abbreviated presentation for that. But just wanted to let you know, and Diane will lead us through that presentation. It's an expanded evaluation period because of COVID, but we also tried to capture more this year of what the city's response was with an aging in place lens in terms of how we responded to older adults who were kind of, in some of the high risk groups, particularly early in the pandemic. And so with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to Diane.
Thanks, Corey. Good evening, Social Justice Task Force members. I know this is the least focused item of the 3, so I'll try and be brief. We normally have 3 of us doing this presentation, but we're trying to be able to get to the Behavioral Health Task Force. Not task force, the crisis unit. So appreciate the opportunity to share the year 4 findings from the City of West Hollywood's Aging in Place, Aging in Community Strategic Plan and Initiative. As Corey touched on, the plan was launched in 2016 and formally organizes the city's work to be an age-friendly community. And it evolved with leadership thought from the World Health Organization, AARP's Age-Friendly States and Communities, and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, and the California Master Plan on Aging. So from the start, the City of West Hollywood City Council has funded regular evaluations to kind of gauge the process toward the initiative goals. And as Corey stated, the evaluation this year focused on COVID-19. So it was an extended period, and we'll start with the strengths of the initiative's response during COVID-19. The overall sentiment was that the city and its contractors made an impact in several ways. First, quickly pivoting to virtual, remote, or physically distanced service delivery while trying to meet a significant increase in need for services by older adults. And the city and nonprofit agency partners also were able to strategically repurpose existing infrastructure for new uses to meet community needs. We'll go into, in another minute, we'll go into another minute worth of information on that. Some of the challenges that we faced during COVID-19 included gaps in older adults' access to broadband internet and digital services, and a wide range of skills and abilities to use those tools if they were available. There was also challenging connecting with community members who had been less engaged with the city pre-pandemic, as well as communication challenges regarding the rapidly evolving health directives and various eviction moratoriums in multiple languages and mediums. It was also difficult locating emergency housing for older adults living in temporary shelters during the pandemic, as well as it was addressing isolation, loneliness, and mental health issues that existed pre-COVID were exacerbated by the stay-at-home directives. So now to talk a little bit more about how the city pivoted. In the report, you can read more about how the city and its partners did this, such as having transit operators deliver groceries and packaged meals. There was an expanded number of home delivered meals through Project Angel Food, JFS Nutrition, and the LA LGBT Center Senior Program. And the city increased transit subsidies for older adults and people living with disabilities when they did need to access services outside of the home. The city and several partners reached out to engage and connect with community members. The Recreation Division made weekly check-in calls to people. They created a newsletter that goes out to 7,000 residents right now, based on who was engaged with recreation prior to COVID-19. And they offered virtual programming and were able to provide packages delivered to people's homes so that they could do art projects, etc. APLA, JFS, and the LGBT Center Senior Programming all offered virtual classes as well, and workshops to address social isolation and increase access to available resources. The city and its nonprofit partners also worked to ensure community members had access to information and support in the form of legal services, and were able to provide $1.5 million in rental payment assistance that was accessible through the Alliance for Housing and Healing and National Council of Jewish Women. The evaluation provided insights into our path to come, realizing that hybrid service delivery systems is desirable for the future, prioritizing increased technology access, including broadband for all. Affordable housing is critical to helping older adults afford to age in West Hollywood. And overall, the city's strategies and priorities are increasingly intersectional initiatives that advance West Hollywood's age-friendly work, as Corey touched on with our homeless initiative. Our guaranteed income pilot, which is to be launched at the beginning of next year, that will focus on older adult LGBTQIA community members who are living on a low income. And the West Hollywood Homeless Initiative is looking at the feasibility of siting an access center, interim and supportive housing in West Hollywood, as well as the development of the behavioral health unit for community members who are experiencing mental health crisis, which you'll hear about in the next item. So we'll close with highlights for the final phase of Aging in Place, Aging in Community Strategic Plan. And these two, I think, are most relevant to the task force. Taking steps to focus and deepen the city's Aging in Place, Aging in Community initiative commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice as part of our age-friendly work. This includes exploring each of our domains with a racial equity lens, as well as working to increase the diversity among the participants to ensure inclusion for those who have been historically underrepresented. Specifically, the Social Services Division is engaging a consultant to study how West Hollywood BIPOC community is served through existing social services programs, and those findings will be integrated into the 2022 through 2025 social services contracts requests for proposals, and it'll include contracting for services as well to advance the city's Aging in Place and Aging in Community initiative. So that's the abbreviated version. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And if you want to learn more, we're available. You can check out the website, weho.org/aging, and happy to answer any questions you have.
Daniel, you have your hand.
Yes. Hi again. So I've a lot of the services, this is wonderful, and I didn't know that this is a service here, so thank you for all of this. A lot of these services seem very applicable to those who fall within our disabled community, which a couple months ago, we received a public comment regarding somebody from that community who felt that, the West Hollywood community doesn't necessarily serve to them as much as we think about other marginalized communities. I definitely want to make sure that they feel included. Does that fall, would that fall under here? Is there another organization that would handle that?
Well, it does fall under our under Aging in Place, because we often have older adults who are living with disabilities. But for example, our largest social services contract is with Jewish Family Services. They assist anyone of any religious background or any with case management and counseling services, social activities, and emergency assistance with utility bills. They have two different components to their work. One is older adults, but the second is people who are 18 and above who are living with a disability. So our largest contract with the city is for both older adults and people living with a disability, as well as we work with Disability Resource Center, and they provide services as well. So, and we have other, there are people living with HIV, so we have specific services. So there's a wide spectrum depending on the needs. And I hope that answers your question.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Marcus, do you want to go? Do you have your hand up? You're on mute, by the way. Okay.
Hi, Diane and Corey. Just wanted to know, how would someone find out about these services? How are we actively going? I know as a citizen of West Hollywood, you have to register when moving in, but how do we promote these services, or is it someone easily find out about it without going to the website and going through this and that?
Over the years, the city has done a wide variety of outreach attempts, most recently very much in social media, trying to reach out to people. But one of the things that was highlighted actually in Aging in Place report was that communications would try to reach out to the helpful neighbor or friend and our ambassadors. You all are our ambassadors. All of our boards and commissions and task forces are our ambassadors to the community. So what we have found is that sometimes people don't access services until they need them. You can hear the same information, but until you're ready to receive it, sometimes it's not accessible. So we hope to keep repeating and sending it out via our landlord tenant newsletters. We've highlighted through the recreation information, through the website, through our social media. We have a brochure that's available in both hard copy and online that lists the social services available. So we do try to get the information out in a wide variety of platforms.
And one of the other, one of the other things that that we did during COVID is that, you know, more people were needing more service really than ever before, and a lot of people who had never needed services before, but they lost their jobs or they were caretaking, you know, family members. So the city did send out the social services guide in English, Spanish, and Russian to all households in the city. So hopefully those of you who live in the city were able to receive that. But it is an ongoing challenge, because as Diane mentioned, you kind of know it's there maybe in the back of your mind, but until you need it, you don't know the whole kind of, you know, depth and breadth of what's available. But I know that the Social Services Division has come before this body as well to share information. And as we continue to do that, you'll all kind of learn more. And as you have questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us and the Social Services Division. We'll speak for them since they're not here tonight, but I know that they would welcome that. So if you have a neighbor or a friend or somebody in the community that you feel like they might benefit from services, feel free to make the call. It's very easy to get connected to the services that are available.
So a couple months back, we actually did have someone from social services speak. They gave us really kind of an output of what non-BIPOC people are using or leveraging versus the BIPOC community. Aging services weren't high on the list, and we're wondering, is that because of the population, or is that because of access to information? So that's just kind of a concern that came out of that report. So I feel free to answer either way. So
I think we'll know more once they complete that needs assessment. In terms of, I think, you know, we can look at what the population numbers are and make some assumptions, but I think it's also important for us to look at, are people just not being reached and being able to access the information that they need. So we're looking forward to them. They've got the consultants hired. So they're moving forward with that process. And so we'll look forward to that information, both as it relates to homeless services and aging services for our division.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? All right, turning it back to you, Corey, for the next report out.
All right, thank you, Diane. And then I'll thank Jasmine in advance. I know she's going to help us with our presentation, with our slides. And Elizabeth Anderson, another program administrator in the Strategic Initiatives Division, is here and will help with this presentation tonight as well. We're really here. We wanted to share the information about this proposed citywide behavioral health crisis response unit. And we look forward to sharing the information we have to date. It's in development and as proposed at this point. And then really, we asked council, and council directed us to come to you for feedback as we look to develop this model of service. And Jasmine, if we can we can go ahead and go to the second slide, please. Great. So we are going to be trying to get all of your best thinking on the development of this type of service in West Hollywood. And we will put these questions back up later in the presentation as well. But just want to, as you hear information and think about this, we want to know if you see a need for this type of service in West Hollywood, what you think would be valuable outcomes from having this type of team, any of your suggestions to make the service more effective or increase the level of service, and just generally any other thoughts you have as we go through this. The city prides itself on prioritizing the well-being of community and demonstrates that commitment through the funding of social services that you heard about previously, investing in public safety and advancing civil rights and social justice through legislation and advocacy. And I think, as we all saw the civil unrest of the last year and a half, that really put government and other institutions on notice that continuing the status quo in the first responder system can further perpetuate racial inequity and social injustice. And in West Hollywood, we have been asking and exploring in partnership with our contracted agencies and frontline outreach workers, what can we do differently? And if we go to the next slide, please. So to answer that, we really looked at what are the strengths and the gaps in our existing systems. So we know that the first responder system has expertise in law enforcement through sheriffs and through life safety issues with the fire department. And as you've heard, we have a really robust portfolio of social service agencies. There's the block by block security ambassadors, there are PacWest security guards that support public safety and seek to enhance the community's quality of life. Jasmine, if you can go to the next slide, please. But when we look at the system as a whole, and really, I think more critically, it's clear that, I think we can say now is the time, and I think a lot of people would say it's been well past time, to look at enhancing the crisis services system by broadening the expertise of first responders. And we think we can do that. Okay, and we've got some fun person on our Zoom, I guess.
Jasmine, we need to limit people's access to the
presentation. Yeah.
Thank you for your colorful additions.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll move on. We think we can do that, increase that capacity, and broaden the expertise through the creation of a new first responder option, which is a behavioral health crisis response unit. And this type of unit would have the capacity to bring supportive services immediately to a person in crisis, a crisis that's been triggered by a mental health condition or a substance abuse disorder. And we're just going to stay off the slides for now. But unless we can do that, I'm looking. If we
I
can do
think-
that,
I think we handled it, Corey, so I'll go back.
okay, yeah. If we can go
Sorry
to
about that, everyone.
No problem. Go down to slide, the next one. There we go. So this is really looking at, the kind of top level, most compelling rationales for introducing this type of unit into our first responder system. And also, kind of how that unit would be a strategic enhancement to the local emergency system. So our hope is that it would improve quality of life for housed and unhoused community members in the city, that it would advance the city's racial justice and social equity values. For example, I think we've shared with you in the homeless initiative presentation, we know that people of color and LGBTQIA people experience trauma and homelessness at higher rates. Establishing a first responder model that is specially trained, trauma informed, and culturally competent, and one that would intervene with supportive behavioral health services that would help ensure that community members are matched in the moment of crisis with services that actually match their needs and divert them away from the criminal justice system. Our hope is this unit would reduce the reliance on sheriffs and fire to meet social services needs by adding this first responder team, and that it would increase the connectivity between the city's already existing contracted agencies, so that as people are stabilized in their crises, that they could be then connected to existing providers for further and ongoing support, and potentially provide them with an agency home, a case manager, and ongoing service and support. We can go to the next slide, Jasmine, please. So stakeholder engagement is an important part and will continue to be an important part of the development of this type of service and this type of unit. To date, we've been consulting with our West Hollywood homeless services providers, mental health providers. We've had multiple conversations with a group that a lot of people had got a lot of attention last summer called Cahoots. It's an alternate crisis response model based in Oregon. We've had conversations with the Sacramento-based Steinberg Institute, which is focused on mental health. And that is really to talk about federal and state legislation that supports these type of teams and that would support increased capacity of the 988 system for potential dispatch. So some people are familiar with 988, and we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. And then as we have been in progress, we've been to the Council Subcommittee on Homelessness, Human Services Commission, Public Safety Commission. We're here with you tonight. We're surveying all of the city's advisory boards and having conversations with the County Board of Supervisors, the County Department of Mental Health and Public Health, the State Department of Health and Human Services, and as we've talked about with our homeless services providers, also with the larger West Hollywood Homeless Collaborative. And so we're trying to get the best thinking and the best information we can get as we look toward the development of this team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth to talk about proposed unit operations.
Great, thanks, Corey, and good evening to the task force. So next we'll get into a summary of what the proposed behavioral health unit could look and feel like in West Hollywood. In the proposed model, the unit would be a peer to fire and sheriffs and would expand the expertise of our first responder system. So when a behavioral health crisis call comes in, the unit would represent a third option that could be dispatched to respond to the scene independently or in collaboration with fire or sheriff. Next slide. Okay, another unfortunately disrespecting the slide, so maybe we'll turn that off again. Great. And I will review some of the nuts and bolts of what the unit would look like, including the scope of services. The big ticket items will be the capacity to respond to mental health crisis, provide first aid and non-emergency medical care, substance use disorder counseling, welfare checks, and transportation to additional services. The range of these supportive services are important for all community members, both housed and unhoused. And the staffing mix would include multiple roles to cover this scope of services, including a crisis worker, a medic, a licensed clinician, and a case manager. And now ideally the team would be available 24/7, but we understand it may be necessary to grow to that schedule through a phased approach based on call volume and available funding. And the unit itself would operate out of a wheelchair accessible van with room inside for health and mental health service delivery at the call location. The team would be connected to the emergency dispatch system and would also need their own tech setup to run operations out of their mobile van. In terms of community infrastructure that would be critical to the unit, currently West Hollywood's contracted social service agencies provide community-based services on the street by appointment, and then soon will return to the library for drop-in hours. These invaluable nonprofit partners will continue to provide proactive services, and they'll be in a position to coordinate with the behavioral health unit to help community members with ongoing non-emergency supportive services after the crisis. Midterm, the city's looking at creating more accessible meeting space for people to connect with providers in West Hollywood beyond the drop-in hours at the library. And in the future, as we follow the goals of the West Hollywood Homeless Initiative 5-year plan, the future Homeless Service Access Center and Bridge Housing Facility will be a significant asset and resource for the behavioral health unit to connect people to on-site services. So next, I will get into setting up community and city expectations of the unit, which will shape the success of the program. And here are some of the proposed expectations. The unit will be set up to respond to emergency calls. They will serve all community members, both housed and unhoused, visitors and residents. If the crisis calls for it, the behavioral health unit will have the capacity to conduct assessments for psychiatric holds at the scene or loop in other resources if needed. They would be able to connect the person in crisis to community-based social services funded by the city. And the unit will be able to respond to people experiencing homelessness, conduct welfare checks, and do other outreach. But the unit will not be removing people from public spaces, and they will also not be removing people's personal items. The city will continue to use its existing protocols for managing abandoned belongings. And kind of to recap this section, setting community expectations will be an important part of building trust and establishing the value of this resource as a first responder service in West Hollywood. So as you can imagine, starting a new first responder service will not be as easy as flipping a switch. There's definitely local and regional hurdles to make the program happen here. There are complexities communicating with the county's 911 dispatch system and the developing 988 national and state and what will be a local hotline as well. That may have dispatch capacity that we may want to consider. There's also very limited housing and psychiatric resources, and there's also city and regional budget constraints that factor in. What's good is that we know there is increasing national and state and regional attention on establishing new ways to respond to people in crisis. And with that momentum will come a change in priorities and potentially funding that may help with the local lift of creating this crisis unit in West Hollywood. And then we're on the second to last slide, Jasmine. Thanks for posting it again. So I'm on the planned phases to develop the behavioral health unit. Keep going, a couple more. Perfect. That's great. So our planned phases of development is we have a large staff report we're in the middle of developing right now, and that's going to go to City Council on November 15th. And feedback from you tonight will be included in that report. There's a lot of work to be done in creating the new program, and city staff across multiple divisions are involved, including our division, which is strategic initiatives, social services, community and legislative affairs, and our colleagues in public safety. Overall, the introduction of the behavioral health unit in West Hollywood builds on the strength of our existing system while also answering the question, what can we do differently? This program advances the city's racial equity and social justice priorities. It broadens the expertise of the first responder system, and it advances individual and community quality of life. So with that, we'll end the presentation on, if we're on the next slide. And again, these are the questions we're hoping can guide your feedback to help shape the design of the program to support the West Hollywood community. And we look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
So I have just a couple. Thank you, by the way, for that presentation. I love the idea of the unit. Couple of questions for you. What's going to be the, I guess, look and feel of the people that are performing the help? Because BIPOC people, maybe others, might have a reaction to someone in a sheriff's uniform or a fireman's uniform. And, is there a soft look that's brought in to be able to allow people to open up? What does that look like?
Great question. Definitely, we want to have the look and feel of the unit be as warm and approachable as possible. And one of the goals in creating this alternative to our traditional first responder uniform and all of the bells and whistles that come with that is to ensure that people are addressed in some sort of recognizable uniform, but it would be more like a polo shirt and slacks, or something that you might associate with what somebody would wear when they are going to or receiving services at a health clinic or something like that. So it would be more closer to plain clothes rather than having any sort of badge or majorly identifying information on them. Specifically with our provider feedback from our agencies that serve people who are experiencing homelessness, we continually hear from them that having a large sign on your back or making something very obvious can get in the way of building rapport and facilitating a positive engagement. So we definitely want to keep that in mind, that subtle is a key strategy.
And arriving in an unmarked car of any kind, is that something that's also something that's been thought through?
Actually, I think. Go ahead. Oh, no, sorry. One of the things I think we should have stated more clearly right up front is this is an alternate to calling the sheriffs or fire, and so these teams will be unarmed. These will be mental health clinicians, and I think the other part of the feedback that we got from our agencies was you have to have people who have lived experience as part of these teams, and so we look at when we have peers who are part of the existing homeless outreach teams that are out there now. But that will be an important part of this. And definitely, like for our MET team, that's our mental health evaluation team, it is a co-response. It does include a sheriff's deputy who's specially trained in mental health and de-escalation with a Department of Mental Health clinician. And they don't come in with sirens. They have a kind of unmarked vehicle that is safe for them to be able to transport people to services or the hospital. But this is to kind of get away from sirens and badges and guns and handcuffs and all things that can escalate a mental health crisis rather than de-escalate. So that's the goal.
And I'm speaking as a social justice task force member, but also I'm someone who's leveraged or used the mental health services for West Hollywood at one of the darkest times in my life. So I know how difficult it is to actually access the services. And it was very challenging to get access. So just making sure this is something that's accessible and something that's welcoming and warm is very important. With that said, I know Marcus, you had your hand up for a little bit.
I'm not sure how would one reach out to the services? Is it calling 911 and they dispatch you over based on assessing what's happening? Or will there be a special city number, a 311 number of some sort?
So the dispatch piece is probably the $1 million question, because it is one of the most important points of entry into engaging the system. So we're hearing a lot of folks have feedback on that. We would welcome your thoughts on what would be the best approach. We are seeing models that include 911. We're seeing a potential for integration with the 988, or exploring the idea of integrating with 988, and if it might be possible to connect our program with 988. And then also the idea of a longer 7-digit number that would be attached to the program. Do you have a recommendation on what might be the best strategy?
I think a 3-digit number is easier for everyone to remember. We automatically call 911 and it takes time to go look up the number to the non-emergency number. So I think a 3-digit number is best. Yeah, I think it's best.
Great, thank you.
Great. Krupa, you had your hand up.
I did. Shayla, are you good? I saw your hand up before, so okay. Actually, Marcus's question was mine, basic one to start, which is like I was hoping you could walk us through, like, somebody has a need, then what, and what's their experience. So that's one, just to respond to the prior line of thinking. What part of that is like, I want the decision about who's called to be held by the people experiencing the crisis, or I don't know. I actually, I don't know what I mean by that, but I think what I mean is like, I want to eliminate other people deciding this is like a time for police when somebody is seeing somebody in a mental health crisis, right? So that's why I like the 3-digit number, but that would be something I'd want us to be thinking about in terms of flow, like where those decision points are. So anyway, back to the sort of headline, which is kind of about that. It's like, can you walk me through like what happens? And then if we have time, I want to get to Daniel's question too, like what kind of capacity building and training around those who will be responding will there be as well? Is the second question.
Great. I'm feverishly typing as everyone's talking. And so specifically on what happens. So big picture is a phone number is called, the person engages with someone who is trained on the phone to assess what's going on, and then the team is dispatched. The big question is where dispatch is in which system. So to your point, the models that we're seeing that use 911 as the way to manage dispatch, some cities have dispatch centers that are their own operation, and they dispatch fire or they dispatch police. In our city, 911 goes to sheriffs, and then the sheriff's dispatch assesses the situation and decides if sheriff's is the right dispatch call or if it's fire, and then it's transferred to LA County Fire. So a piece that if we went through the 911 strategy, the point of contact would be the sheriff's dispatch, and there would need to be training and capacity built within LA County Sheriff's West Hollywood station to be able to be asking questions to assess if the behavioral health unit was the right one to dispatch. And then that would be that process. Alternatively, if we looked at a number like 988, that's its own system that is being mostly influenced through federal legislation, state legislation, local operations with the Diddy Hirsch Mental Health Center, which is the lead responder currently for the suicide prevention lifeline, and they'll be the lead for when it converts to 988, and as the capacity of 988 expands to potentially include dispatch. So that's one zone where we're trying to figure out what that would look like, pros and cons, what might be feasible, also what might be feasible through positioning it in our 911 existing system, pros and cons. And then another kind of potential strategy would be to look at what other ways can we connect to a 3-digit number that would be able to take West Hollywood calls and then do assessment and triage. Kind of on the back end, one thing that we do know from looking at the CAHOOTS data out of Eugene, Oregon, which has been in operation for 30 years, there's definitely a benefit of being able to have rapid communication possible between the crisis unit and their police department. Their data shows that most frequently when there is back channel collaboration, it's the police departments requesting the mobile unit to come on scene, and the assessment that the mobile unit is best equipped to manage the crisis. So we do want to have likely the capacity to crosstalk, but on the front end, when somebody is calling in to request services, we want that to be a efficient experience, to not have them be handed off accidentally to the wrong group and make sure that the need can be assessed, not only if the caller is in the crisis themselves, but also if the caller is requesting services on behalf of someone they see in the community who needs help. If in saying all those things, if you have a recommendation on what you think is a strong path forward, we would be happy to note it.
I have tons of thoughts, but Daniel, you had your hand up.
Thank you for walking us through that. And as someone who, again, very similar to Jonathan, been in mental health crisis, both myself and others, like in that experience, there's so many things going through your mind. And I think an additional number that you haven't been trained with for almost 30 years, that's not the first thing that's going to come to mind. I think, 911 still is going to be very much ingrained. And even for somebody like me who is aware of this service and does know that 988 is coming, I would just want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible for those who, and I'm sure everybody in this group very much can empathize with this, is as many services are out there and as much work as we're all putting in to communicate and make sure that that's out there, there won't be people who know that this is a service. And I think that is sort of my reasoning why I think maybe 911 still feels like it should be a centralized hub, obviously with additional training and making sure that like they're getting the right services. The other reasoning that I was thinking behind that as well, if there's a specific reason as to why, in addition to the mental health unit, the fire department's needed, I would just want to make sure that we're consolidating as much of that emergency response as possible.
So Daniel hit on a lot of what my question was, but my question was more around what's the thought around the socialization awareness journey, which that's really the theme of, I think, essence of what Daniel was saying. It's just so important that we make sure that it's not just the people that are going through the crisis. It's more of, let's say, the bars or the restaurants or people that are noticing, chaos outside, or, is there going to be a billboard? Like how are we going to do what kind of marketing campaign of awareness are we going to create?
So that sounds like a recommendation for a strong marketing campaign, because I think you're getting to the
we know how it goes down, right? It's
Yeah.
just, we have these great services and no one uses them. We're like, why is no one using them? Well, it's awareness.
Yeah,
right?
For sure it's awareness, and for sure a very strategic multi-platform sustained campaign needs to be baked into the operational budget, because this can't be a one and done splash. Otherwise we'll have zero retention. We have to acknowledge that 911 is the household number, and it's taken a long time. It has a lot of years head start compared to where we're starting right now. And so I think, to that point, the marketing and community education is going to be absolutely critical to make this a relevant resource. And there's that component, and then that speaks to how important it's going to be to wherever dispatch is placed, that it needs the dispatch and assessment process, the triage needs to be able to capture and detect when the person calling in would be best served by the mobile crisis unit. So if it's okay, I'll also loop back to Krupa's question on the need, what type of capacity building and training is going to be needed. And it'll be two-pronged, not only, so it'll be the capacity and training of the people who are delivering the services. Corey mentioned trauma-informed and trauma-informed and extremely effective in their service delivery process. We also want to have them fully trained on all of our existing city contracted agencies and have that literacy and fluency in connecting people to services that will help stabilize them beyond the crisis. And then the other component is the dispatch training, because the ability for the call center to be able to have a warm and welcoming experience for the caller, so that the situation is appropriately assessed and then triaged to the team effectively will be important. So there's really 3 operational training and capacity building elements, plus the training and capacity building of kind of the community education piece.
Is 311 ever still, is that still an option out there, or is that not, that's just not viable?
I am not as familiar with 311, but I am noting that we need to have a quick check on what is feasible with the existing numbers. So 311 right now, I see that tracks to City of Los Angeles. And then 211 is kind of the regional social service hub. And so we'll continue to just confirm or deny the potential functioning of those other numbers, because we do know they exist. I mean, not to get like too technical in the weeds here, but even something as, you know, we got to figure out things like the sheriff's department and, you know, California Highway Patrol have the ability to catch phone calls depending on your like geolocation of where you're calling in. And so there's a lot, I think, back end tech that we need to figure out if it's going to impact the functioning of the team. And then we need to figure out how are we going to, if it is, then we got to go down that path. But we just want to make sure that when somebody is calling, and, you know, like myself, I have a 650 area code, that I don't accidentally get routed to the wrong place, depending on the area code that I'm calling from.
I think Krupa has another question.
I do. I just wanted to check my own understanding. I think in this conversation, a lot of what we're suggesting is that the person in crisis is calling. And I think a reason why I sort of stepped back on one of the comments I was about to make is I was thinking about what if somebody else is calling, if an observer is calling. And so are we're contemplating both for this unit, right? Like that's just how it works, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Corey.
I think the other part of this is to make sure, you know, this will be for people who are housed in the city as well as those who are unhoused. And sometimes some of the service, this isn't what all the teams do, but one of the things we envision is the ability for these teams to also help with kind of wellness checks. So if I'm, you know, I live far away, but I just got off the phone with someone who lives in West Hollywood and they sound like they're in distress, I can call and say, I'm concerned about this person. This is, you know, what they said, or this is why I'm concerned, and this is where they live. The person might not love that their friend called. You know, that's kind of frequently the case, no matter who they call. But yes, people could call. They could call when they see somebody on the street who appears to be having, you know, a psychotic episode. So we anticipate that there will be those calls that are not from the person who's experiencing the crisis, but from an observer. And our hope is that it's a concerned and compassionate observer. But we know that that's not always the case either. And I think that's why the conversation between, you know, 911, 988 or another number is really important. There will have to be significant training that happens no matter what number is used, even if we go to 988. The conversation around, you know, people do know 911 and we'll still call 911, and we will have to have a good kind of mechanism for those calls to be, you know, assessed and routed to the appropriate team. That you know, Elizabeth said it's the $1 million question. It's a central hub of how this will all work, and so we're taking the conversations about dispatch very seriously and kind of really kind of diving into a lot of what the options are. And I guess I would also pose, I know we still have some other hands up, but I would also pose to this group, you know, is there, you know, and I think Daniel, you said, you know, 911 is known, and I think there's always some value to a known entity. There will be state and federal campaigns to raise awareness around 988 as well, and we will hope to, you know, leverage those efforts as well. Is there any thought kind of as a group about 911 versus another number, or a desire to not use 911?
Well, I can jump. I mean, I think it's we're talking around the stuff, right? Which is like, if a not benevolent person is talking and giving their sense of a story to 911 and you don't, and that, then I worry about that. But that dispatcher has to be really well trained, but they're also only reflecting what they're hearing. So I don't know. I think the devil's in all the details here, right? In terms of who's picking up the call, how they're handling, who's calling in the first place. I think 988 as an option. I don't know if it has to be either or. 988 as an option is tremendous with a campaign in terms of like the best option, but we should absolutely assume that 911 will be called and that people on the other line need to be able to handle that well. And then to put a point, but want to get to the other questions. I think a question for me is when teams are, is dispatched the right word? Deployed, I guess, or, to the scene, is there a scenario in which there's a multifunctional team going? And in that scenario, what happens, right? Because like, what if the dispatcher makes the wrong call, which has happened a lot. So anyway, these are the things that are swirling. It is not easy. I'm really grateful that we're taking this on and trying to think through it all.
Thank you. That's great. Daniel, I know that you have your hand up again, and then Marcus, I believe you're after Daniel.
And to echo Krupa, I'm very appreciative of this conversation. I think that this is very much needed. And happy to play out every scenario because I think we need to. That's our job. I had one quick question that came out of something Elizabeth you'd mentioned, having a different area code. And this may be a technical question just to ask. If it was a different number, is that geofence based off of your number where you're at? The reason why I ask, and I'm sure we can all agree, West Hollywood is such a tourist destination that we have a large nightlife, community that a lot of people from a lot of different areas come out. And, in that situation, whether you are housed or unhoused, within the city, West Hollywood, I think a mental health crisis is a mental health crisis. And I want to make sure that if there's anything technical from that perspective of like, I don't know how this works, but if that's something that we need to ask just to make sure that if it is a different number that it's available within the area, that would be super helpful. And I guess my other question, which I apologize for not doing this, having done this research, but for 988, I guess my question is if we know what that service will look like. I can't imagine that we're the only city who's having these conversations, but I also can't imagine that every city is having these conversations. So I would just be curious how what we're doing would differ from that would also cover this area if we know that.
So what we know so far, and this is literally developing in real time at the Department of Mental Health, we're attending their community outreach meetings where they're introducing their new consultant, RI International, that's going to be spearheading the development of LA County's alternative crisis response system. 988 would have the capacity, and this also connects to legislation being passed and worked on in the next legislative cycle in spring of 2022. But the idea is that 988 throughout the state will have the capacity to respond with, or pick up the phone and talk to someone and address a crisis by phone, provide crisis counseling by phone, and over time, potentially via text and chat, which I'm assuming is instant message. There's also in the legislation the idea that the AB 988 will bring forward the capacity to be able to run dispatch through 988. So then we zero down into Diddy Hirsch, where they will be running 988 for the LA County region. And from conversations that we've listened to with Department of Mental Health, there would be potential integration of the crisis counseling services that Diddy Hirsch is well renowned for, and the ability to then extend the service pipeline to the getting a crisis unit to the person in person. And so the idea would be potentially that Diddy Hirsch would be able to dispatch through the LA County DMH help desk a mobile crisis unit that would then be able to respond. And right now we understand that the mobile crisis unit would be staffed by a licensed clinician who has the ability to put someone on a psychiatric hold if necessary. And then they would also be, they would have a partner who is a peer, someone with lived expertise and trained in mental health, first aid, and crisis stabilization. And because DMH is funded through Medi-Cal, and the services that they provide will be very specific in scope. The definition is going to be determined by what is Medi-Cal eligible services, very focused on mental health crisis. One thing that is different between that is a component of what we want to do here in West Hollywood. And also the community feedback is we also want to be able to do wellness checks, engage somebody who's experiencing homelessness on the street and is having that's a crisis in itself, but in their specific presentation, it warrants extra outreach. So there's a range of services that will benefit housed and both housed and homeless community members that goes beyond what is potentially Medi-Cal eligible services. And that's where we want to explore setting up a budget that allows for that flexibility. And so then we want to figure out if 988 through Diddy Hirsch would actually be able to handle the triage to a team in West Hollywood that has a larger definition of services than what is available through the Department of Mental Health's psychiatric mobile response team. So that's something that we have in an email, we have in a queue in a conversation with our colleagues at Department of Mental Health. And they literally said, when we sent this list of questions, these are great questions. This is exactly what we need to be looking at and trying to figure out in terms of the city's interests, various cities' interests in doing this. So your question is spot on with what they're trying to figure out at the regional level, because there is definitely going to be interest in local jurisdictions to be able to provide mobile crisis response. And I'll just add one more bit is that this is already a hot conversation topic with our peers in the West Side Cities Council of Governments, Beverly Hills, Culver City, City of LA, and Santa Monica. So all that being said, is kind of context on that.
And I'll just add on to what Elizabeth said is the good thing is that we're all talking to each other. And I think that, looking at what are best practices, are there ways to look at, kind of enhancing or streamlining services? So that's, sometimes that doesn't always happen in these types of efforts, but I think the good thing is that we are in those conversations with our other West Side COG cities and also with the County Department of Mental Health. And all of these things, I think we're all trying to answer questions that none of us have answers to yet for some of these things and, kind of figuring them out as we go. But these conversations inform that work that we're doing, and we'll continue to as we look to develop it. So we really do appreciate the thoughtful questions and the feedback, because we're all figuring it out as we go.
Great. And Marcus, I know you have a question as well.
So I just wanted to clarify. So I did call. So 311 appears to be the City of LA's non-emergency services, and then 211 is LA County, and then everything else is taken up by some other entity.
Real-time research. I love that.
Hey, thanks. I'm going to check that off the to-do list.
check on the checklist. That's great. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I will turn it over to the public. And are there any speakers for this item from a public perspective? If so, and you're interested in providing comment, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next item. Oh, we have Jorge still. Yes, Jorge, he's a member of the task force. So go ahead.
Yeah, in this situation, sometimes there are people that they call 911 and they already have a bad experience. So if they can find, once they have this, they have that bad experience with the police call, whatever, it's a way that we can give a different number for this person. So, because I know for sure there is a lot of people, they very afraid to call 911. And once they did it once, that they have the bad experience, maybe we can find a way to have a follow-up with those persons and be sure that they, any time that they have an emergency, they do a call to a different number and they don't have to deal with the same situation, because it would be very difficult for somebody like that. They already have a bad experience to try to call again. So they must just suffer the moment and avoid to call. So.
And that's a really good point. I think that's part of what we want to, that's why people are looking at this is an alternative, crisis response. In large part, the existing system isn't necessarily built to respond to behavioral health or mental health crises. And so I think this is really looking at, we've got sheriffs and we've got fire, and we think that this is a third team that can be, immediate response that would help alleviate some of the bad experiences that people have had. So I think that's a really important point. And that's, I think, the kind of questions about, 911, 988, a specific West Hollywood number. We're working through kind of the technical pieces of that. And I think, as Daniel mentioned, what can people call when they are, they have a different number. A lot of people in West Hollywood have a cell number that's from someplace else, let alone all the visitors who come in. And I think Elizabeth has made, a good point in other parts of the conversation that this will be a West Hollywood service. So if you are in West Hollywood, whether you're here for, entertainment or night on the town or visiting a friend, or you live here in a house, or you live here and you're unhoused, this is a service that will be responsive citywide. And that's, I think, another important part of why we want to make sure that dispatch piece has really worked out. That's part of what keeps us up at night is dispatch. And so I think, we're going to have to continue to work through that process. And we know, no matter what, there are going to be people who call 911. I think, but to your point, like sometimes they'll be benevolent and sometimes they won't. But we got to make sure that training on the receiving end of 911 is well versed. And I think Elizabeth mentioned that, in cahoots, the model is that, that there is some opportunity to have conversation, but the police there have requested cahoots to respond with much greater frequency than the cahoots team has had to call on law enforcement as backup or support for their response. And I think that is certainly an important part of their operations and an impressive part of their operations, and something that we'll continue to want to look at as well, that we do want to get away from not having the right service responding to the right situation. And so our hope is that this team helps create that.
Excellent. Any other questions? Please raise your hand if you are interested in speaking. All right. Well, with that said, Corey and Elizabeth, we applaud you. Thank you for the hard work. I think everybody on this committee is really excited about the work that you're doing. So thank you. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much. This will go to council November 15th. So if you want to provide comment or additional input to the council members, feel free to do that as well in advance or on November 15th. And thank you all for your feedback and your thoughtful questions and your time.
Thank you. With that said, I think we're going to move on to agenda number 7 on the agenda, which is the subcommittee items. I think the first thing we want to do is we wanted to go through the subcommittee report template. Jasmine, did you? Oh yeah, you got it. You're on it. So as we were talking through, one of the big things that we want to talk about what progress looks like. And so part of the idea of progress for us as a committee means that we kind of just keep each other on the journey, so to speak. So the idea behind this is maybe having a template that we can all really kind of articulate what our vision is from a subcommittee standpoint. Not only articulate our vision, but kind of what our core objectives are going to be, and then the progress that we're making over the course of a given month, and what we're intending for the next month, right? So with that said, maybe we turn to the next slide. So this is really what the status report looks like. It's items discussed and actions taken last month. It's next steps prior to upcoming task force meeting. It's some of the upcoming milestones that you might have as a subcommittee, which should be based on what your overarching objectives are, but we can talk about that in a minute. And then the next piece is any kind of like areas where you really need assistance with like issues or any kind of risks or decisions even. And then any decisions that you've made, you may want to document here as well, right? So these are just this is kind of an example. Well, it's kind of a template. And the other piece too. So, I have an example of what this could look like. Jasmine, maybe I should share my screen on this one. Because the idea behind this was really having something, oops, I'm not able to share. But the idea behind this though, oh, there we go, perfect. Oops, still not.
You should be able to now.
I am. Pulling it up and realizing that I am, sorry, give me a second here, guys. So on that page though, I'll speak to it while I'm trying to pull this up. The idea is for us to have a good vision in terms of what that could look like. In terms of, yikes, I can't believe that's not it. I'm just going to be embarrassed for a minute around some of the things I'm trying to accomplish on this. There we go. Okay, so I'm pulling it up right now. Give me a minute. Sorry. I'm just going to share my desktop, which is very dangerous to do, but I'm going to do that. And there we go. Sorry. It's okay that you see that. The whole world sees that. However, there we go. All right. So I'm usually really technology savvy, but I'm going to own that I'm not always perfect. So anyways, the economic development overview took a stab at just providing what this could look like, right? Where we talk about our vision, our primary objectives, team members, our needs. And this is not something that has been socialized with my subcommittee task force members. Is really just a stab on a sample. So it's illustrative in nature. And the idea is for us to think about what do we want to envision as a subcommittee for the city of West Hollywood. So with that said, for this, right, an example could be as a result of our work, by 2025, we would like for the city of West Hollywood to experience a thriving BIPOC entrepreneur community and equitable diversity among both residents and business citizens in line with or exceeding California BIPOC census demographic data, right? This could be something that might be a vision for an economic development group. For the for homeless, people working on the homeless, it could be, we envision an area where we're able to mitigate or reach people before they reach homelessness, as well as to address all the needs of currently unhoused individuals, right now. So there could be many different visions that you might have in mind as a subcommittee. You may want to talk through it, but the idea is for us to start with the vision, identify what our primary objectives are. And so if we were to boil down a few of the objectives that our subcommittee task force talked about, One would be foster belonging for existing BIPOC residents and BIPOC business owners within the city of West Hollywood. Second might look like simplifying and lowering barriers to entry for current and future BIPOC business owners outside of the city of West Hollywood to operate physically within the borders of the city of West Hollywood and also conduct business with customers and other business owners within the city of West Hollywood. So that'd be a second one. Third one could be increased BIPOC representation in the West Hollywood residential community by 100%. So essentially doubling the BIPOC presence. So that could be, these are examples of what objectives and visions could look like. And so if every subcommittee did this, it would allow us all to bring each other on the journey. And then we can talk about, we can understand maybe what some of the next steps are. We can pressure test ideas with one another. We can really think through what progress might look like. It also will help us be able to articulate our recommendations a little bit easier to the council members, both in January and in April. So would love to hear your thoughts on the template and the need for it, or the, or the desire for it. I'm going to just pause for a minute.
Hey, Jonathan, do you mind taking it off the presentation view?
Yes, I will do that. Stop share. Okay.
And I would just add one thing to Jonathan's really good presentation. One of the things we envisioned was that these items would be filled out by each subcommittee each month. Staff can do that, or the subcommittee can do that. We would then include these within the agenda packet so that all the other task force members could see what the other task force were working on. And that way we could have that conversation each month and provide feedback to the different subcommittees on the key items that they are looking at.
Having already reviewed this previously with Jonathan's staff, perk of being vice chair, I guess. I have a quick technical question as it relates to our bylaws. Are we allowed to use Google Docs? One thing that we had discussed in our last subcommittee meeting is, when collectively we're able to work on a document together, obviously that's super helpful. Our schedules are all over the place. Poor Marcus literally starts work at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So he's late. Are we allowed to do that? Does that like violate any bylaws or anything?
That's actually a great question. I think the Brown Act was invented before technology got to the point it is today. So let us ask our city clerk about that and see if we can do that. And if so, what the limitations are on it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Hey, I love the template. Thank you, Jonathan. I could see that already working for my subcommittee. I'd like to add, maybe since we do have a limited amount of time, to have some type of Gantt chart or accountability across, to just kind of move things along and maybe have some deadlines associated with those objectives. Yeah.
That's where it would go next, right? Because one of the things that we did as a subcommittee is we came up with a few tangible things that we could achieve. And then we put together kind of a roadmap to get there, and just kind of we're pressure testing what that roadmap might look like. But yes, I mean, that's the idea. And then with that, your update then becomes very simple, right? It's like, well, we achieved these things based on our plan, and then we're looking to achieve these next things based on our plan, right? So yes, is I'm on board with everything you just said. So.
I think the question that I still have, we were talking a little bit about this in our subcommittee meeting, is about the section on like, we'd like to hear from X. Yeah. So we say all that, but we only have a limited number of meetings left, right? So one, how are we prioritizing who's calendared and in what sequence? And then two, we were talking about like what the opportunity is for us to meet with folks. That does feel like it starts to get a little tricky with Brown Act but there is, to Giselle's point, like a question in my mind around just like time, accountability, moving things forward.
So I think there's 3 components to that, and I think there's ways to address each one. As a subcommittee, we can ask people to come in and speak to you, whether it be community members, community organizations, city staff, at any point during your subcommittee meetings. That's pretty easy. So if as a subcommittee, you want to meet a couple times a month and have this many people come in, X, Y, and Z, we can do that. For the entire group, we have to try to limit the presentations to 1 or 2 per meeting just because of the other business items we need to do. So it would just be prioritizing which individuals come to the subcommittee meetings and then which ones are more beneficial to the entire task force. In terms of getting out to talk to people, I think that's upcoming within the next couple of months. We were thinking that subcommittees would get some of their kind of key ideas formulated just a little bit more and then go out and talk to the community about that. But really, that's also up to the subcommittee. The subcommittees can go out and talk to the community as much as they want, and we will help facilitate that whenever you guys want to. So if it's setting up a table in a park or even something more sophisticated than that, we will help with that, and that could even start now.
Super helpful. Thank you. Then I think we can be more sort of direct and being like, okay, we got a list. So now let's.
If there's a list for the subcommittee, that's easy for us to accomplish. We can work on getting those individuals scheduled. And if they seem to be of use to the entire task force, then we can work on getting those scheduled for the entire task force as well. I think that after, this is an upcoming agenda item on this agenda, after Corey's team presented today, we don't have someone else for the next meeting or the meeting after that. So I think we actually would like to hear from the task force of who are the individuals or groups that we'd like to hear from as the entire task force for the next 2 months.
Yep. Thank you for that. All right. I guess so. Do we have to vote on whether or not okay. So do we have a motion to approve the subcommittee report?
Motion to approve the subcommittee template, Samilpa.
Great. Do we have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those in favor say nay.
Aye.
All right, and then Jasmine, do you want to do a roll call vote?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure, Marcus, were you interested in saying something?
I was just saying aye.
Okay, got it. Jonathan Wilson,
Aye.
Daniel Zamilpa,
Aye.
Krupa Desai,
Aye.
Marcus Smith,
Aye.
Giselle Washington,
Aye.
Jorge Sephiroth.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Excellent. Go team. So now we're going to go through, I guess, the subcommittee reports, and I don't have the order in front of me, but why don't we do the safety one? Because I know that's Daniel's.
Sure. And I invite my fellow subcommittee members to speak as well. The items that we've discussed so far are basically still the same items we discussed last time. I think we've just kind of gone into just a little bit more detail in terms of like what we're looking to accomplish with each of those. When we say defunding the police, yes, but what does that mean? So I think that that's definitely going to be something that we put together with our next meeting, as well as formalizing that within the our fabulous new template. I think with a lot of that, I think we're still anticipating the meeting with the sheriff's department. I know that that was going to be happening at some point. I'm still a little unclear as far as when we will be speaking to them. I do think that as a full committee that would be helpful. I think that the sheriff's department does speak to a lot of what we're discussing across all of our subcommittees. So if scheduling wise, if only the safety committee can speak to that, I guess we'll have to take that, but I think that would be helpful to bring them in for everyone. Krupa, Marcus, anything else?
We also wanted to speak to, a representative of the actual street ambassadors, just about a typical shift for them, what they see, what they do, how they respond. That will take us back to the original street crisis information that we learned. But those two, I think, are priority right now.
Great. Thank you for the update. Any questions for public safety?
Really quickly, I just wanted to make sure. So I'm thinking for the next subcommittee meeting, public safety subcommittee meeting, we can invite someone from Block by Block and then the West Hollywood Sheriff Station.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I would want to clarify from the Sheriff's Department, would we want someone from the West Hollywood Sheriff's Department? Do we have very specific questions for the Sheriff's Department? Would we want someone higher up than West Hollywood? I would suggest a good starting point would be the West Hollywood Sheriff's Department, and we could go from there. It's very easy to schedule either our captain or our lieutenant to come in. It's a little bit more difficult to schedule some of the higher ups at the Sheriff's Department to come in. And I think that actually our lieutenant and captain will provide better information about West Hollywood to us.
I definitely.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
I would definitely vote to speak with our captain or the lieutenant.
Yeah, and I think I certainly have very specific questions. I'm sure there are many others that the fellow task members have as well. So if Jasmine, would that be best to send those to you together? If we're able to get that Google Doc access, maybe we throw them in there, just so we're not duplicating any questions. But yeah, any whatever's easiest to send you our questions, I'm happy to contribute mine.
Yeah, for now, let's do email. I know that's not as efficient as Google Docs, but I should have an answer about that. I'm speaking with the city clerk now. So for now, email.
Thank you.
And I think the questions will be helpful for the Sheriff's Department. We can look to, I believe that our local Sheriff's Department will be able to offer or to answer the vast majority of the questions, but just having us see those in advance, it will give us a flavor of who should be there.
In Daniel and Marcus, it just out of curiosity and maybe transparency, would it be okay if we ask you to give a small kind of report out next week on that? Or not next week, sorry, next month on that? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Housing and homelessness and social services. Any updates on that?
I'll speak to the homeless. So primarily we narrowed down our ideas from the last two subcommittee meetings into some overarching goals like increasing access. We do want to invite David Juni, who's the social service manager, to speak to our partner list and the RFP process as it currently stands. Also looking into homeless prevention. So we have, going into the rental assistance, kind of getting a gut check on what happened post-COVID, if the city of West Hollywood is still helping out with rent and or if it's totally paused. Andy, what am I missing?
I think that was a good summary. I think one of the other things that we talked about was what kind of job training programs are available for people, as well as job placement programs, and seeing if there are other opportunities or organizations that the city could potentially partner with to expand those options.
Great. Excellent. And then from an economic community development standpoint, we've gone ahead and created a few priorities. One being that we identified that we want to make sure that there is access to information on how to promote your business or create a business. The other piece is also around business certification. And so we have asked John to help us secure a speaker to talk about the benefits, the pros and cons of certifications, business certifications in the city, benefits for the city as well as benefits for the entrepreneurs as well. And in the idea of having a BIPOC certification or any other certification around that sense. And then we have an overarching plan that we've created. And I think the RFP, just to piggyback on what Giselle said, I think the RFP process conversation is something that we are definitely very interested in, given that it's part of the scope for us. So if we could have that as a larger, maybe that goes to the larger conversation, maybe next month. I know that as a subcommittee, we've had some challenges with our timing of the meeting. So I know Shayla's on the call and she's definitely been very vocal and I appreciate her input. So Shayla, is there anything I may have missed?
Actually, your summary sounds really on point. And you're right, the whole timing has been a challenge and I apologize for missing the last.
No apology needed.
It sounds really good.
Good. All right, good stuff. All right, so with that said, is there anything else that we need to cover off on from a subcommittee standpoint? If not, we will turn this also over to the public. Is there any additional commentary that we want to hear from the public? Are there speakers for this item? If so, please make sure to raise your hand in the Zoom feature, or raise your hand in Zoom via the Zoom feature. All right. Okay, and so then ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is discussion about the community partners, business owners, community activists.
Jonathan?
Yep.
I think Marquita is
Oh, did I miss
interested in
it?
speaking. Yeah.
So Marquita, go ahead. If you have
I'll set the timer, so she has 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes. Yep.
Sure, I won't need that long. Marquita Thomas, resident of West Hollywood, pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the executive director of the Los Angeles LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. Most of my time and energy is spent around certification and connecting people from historically underutilized communities to opportunities. So I'd be more than happy to offer my expertise in any of the ways that you want to explore certification. And I just wanted to offer myself up as a resource. That's all.
That sounds great. Actually, I mean, we're looking to hear from somebody who can speak to some of the benefits that organizations get from being certified, and that we want to hear from what they can get from a local perspective, the benefits, maybe how they can tap into the state side as well as the federal side. So it'd just be good to have that voice, and not to put you on the spot now, but perhaps maybe that's an opportunity for you to come back and speak to us on.
And Marquita, I'll reach out to you. This is John Leonard. So we can get that connected.
Excellent. All right. And then so item number 8. I think Marquita.
Sure. So yeah, sure. So this is just a continuation of the conversation we're already having. As John mentioned, we don't have staff scheduled for the next meeting in November. Remember, again, we rescheduled that one to November 30th. So we really just wanted to hear from the task force and see if there were folks that you wanted to hear from, or if there were entities outside of the city that you were interested in receiving a presentation from for the next meeting.
And so it sounds like at this point, we will work to schedule the lead for block by block security ambassadors and Ed Ramirez who is our captain at the sheriff's station for the November 30th meeting. But if we have other individuals or other groups, topics we're interested in for December, that's always helpful for us to schedule in advance. But Unless I hear objections, we will move forward with block by block and our sheriff's captain for November.
Well, and Marquita as well.
So I was going to have Marquita come to our subcommittee meeting if possible for.
Oh, okay.
And then we can have Marquita come to the full group after that.
Yeah, that sounds great as well.
Okay,
good. All right, moving on to item number 9. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, list of, I figured it'd probably just be helpful just to throw all our full list out there. I think based off of the ones that, at least for our subcommittee, the first is somebody probably at the local level. I'm not sure which level would make most sense, but given the updated law regarding cannabis related crimes and reparations for that, somebody to speak to regarding that, and just general other drug offenses, and somebody who can speak to that realm. Let's see. And then I think that this might be somebody maybe from the LGBT Center, but somebody who can speak specifically to sex work, maybe somebody who is a sex worker and is willing to speak to us. That would be helpful to speak to. I think that would also, I think those two would be helpful in our subcommittee meeting. And then at least for me, that would cover off for the other items that we're also discussing within our subcommittee.
Got it.
Yeah, so we can talk internally about that, but I have a couple of thoughts already about that. So
awesome. Thanks, Yasmin. Thanks, Tom.
All right. The Spire group. This is item number 9 on the agenda.
Okay, good evening, everybody. And this has been a great meeting. I've appreciated listening in. I want to honor your time, so this will be pretty straightforward. It builds on what you've been discussing in great depth tonight anyway, and I hope we can use your experience even tonight to just deepen and make more specific the work that you can do. So our focus is around what are the options as a task force that you can take. And we know the long-term, well-built out, deeply investigated recommendation is one of those. But if we could, Jasmine, go to the next slide. We offer actually that these are 3 lanes you should always be considering around actions that the task force can take. The first one is a pretty immediate one. As you're having these presentations come before you, and you did a phenomenal job tonight of asking those questions, digging into the information and proposed approaches that are being shared with you. An action that can follow that is a task force can choose to endorse something that is being implemented, piloted, considered, and your recommendation is from you to the council that we endorse the effort from the Human Services Department around X, Y, and Z, or as you heard tonight, staff often references, and it's a good practice for this group to ask. So what do you need in order for that proposed program to be successful? Are there any additional areas of support that would be valuable in moving this idea into implementation? When something is being piloted, you have the option of doing either an immediate endorsement because you're very excited about the possibility and you want the city to take the big step of at least running a pilot, or you can elect to say, love that idea, let's get this group calendared for when that pilot is near conclusion, let's revisit it. And maybe it's at that point, seeing how it goes, that we would want to give a full-throated endorsement. Well, how does that help? Budget considerations for the one thing. a loop to multiple constituencies of interest, feeling well served by the proposed program or activity is another thing. Your voice can be very influential in simply offering an endorsement of some current or proposed effort. Or you can look at what's being described and say, we like where that's going, and we would like to recommend something that builds on that idea, adds an additional dimension to it. For instance, tonight, what we heard was that you really liked the special response team approach. Building upon that, a social marketing campaign that helps to bring a new 3-digit number into consciousness, into being held well, is building upon what is before you. What I've noticed in these presentations is that the staff who have come and shared with you have done a good job in presenting what they have to share. You've asked phenomenal questions. And in addition to giving immediate feedback, there is more. So the immediate feedback serves the initial thing that the staff members are looking for. And in addition, it sets the stage for where you as a task force may want to do more, may want to build upon, add an element or a component that the staff has thought about, but has not fully built out in their proposed plan of action. That's something this task force can recommend as an additional element. Or the third area is you can take on something that on the other side of all your questions and the presentations and so forth, you feel this is an area really that's not covered and it's important to us. So we're going to recommend action or a set of actions to address the gaps, to take on some element that's not been dealt with yet. I want you to think about these 3 lanes, because having observed your last meetings, what I know, and especially the working group reports, you're doing a phenomenal job of information gathering. On the other side of gathering that information, you want to take a action, and the action that's appropriate to this group is using your power of the recommendation. And so endorsements can happen quickly. Building upon something is medium term, and addressing unaddressed gaps probably takes the greatest amount of time and preparation to bring forward. I would hope that this task force over time would be offering things in each of these 3 lanes. If we could go to the next slide. It often starts with how you're using these presentations, like the ones we had tonight. What you see before you was taken from the presentation offered on August 17 from the social services team, the departmental representatives there. It's only a portion of it, but this is why these presentations happen. They allow you to do a pulse read of what's happening in the landscape right now, what's already on the radar, what's in the works, in the planning and the efforts that the city is already working towards. So your conversation always starts with an assessment of what have we learned. And then from that, we move to the next slide, because the next slide then allows you to begin to say, what do we want to do, therefore, based on what we have learned? As a subcommittee, a working group, do we want to build out something that we're endorsing? Do we want to craft something that allows us to build upon what the city says that they're doing? Or are we going to take on building out and addressing a gap that's not there altogether. I looked at my notes from that meeting, and one of the items that I think a couple of your U.S. task force members engaged around, for instance, was having public showers available to the unhoused. If that is an idea that you wanted to build out more deeply, the task force would start by saying, what did we learn from human services around what's happening in that arena? Because my note said they had given it some thought, but it was not settled as to how they could move forward on that. That's what you inherit. And as a task force, you say, therefore, what does that mean for us? Will we build upon their idea? Do we see that as a gap? How do we want to advance our efforts moving forward? And you begin to build that out. Bottom right-hand corner, key issues, risk, and decisions, which says there may be more information we need to gather in even formulating our own recommendation once we decide what direction we're going to go with this. And that's where this request for additional presentations, or who's not at the table and what voices do we want to add to the mix. Again, very helpful questions when you have these presentations before you. Who's already at the table with you? And from your own assessment, are there other perspectives, voices, stakeholders that you feel would be of value to that? Are there other elements of information, collaborators, partners that would be important to building out your element? And from this, using your very template, this is where you find yourself bringing recommendations forward to the whole group and ultimately shaping recommendations that will go to council. So I just wanted to offer this up as a walkthrough sample, that it shouldn't be a far off in terms of what you can do. There are immediate actions that the task force can take or be about taking. And that's important, because when we don't see it through that light, we may focus on what we can't do and miss the opportunities for the immediate things we can do. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. Any questions that we have for Diane? All right, if anybody from the public, we don't have anybody from the public on here, but I probably have to ask that anyways. Are there any speakers for this item? If so, and you're interested in commenting, please use your raise the hand feature in Zoom. All right, well, let's move on to items from staff. So Jasmine and John, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Do we skip over?
Yeah, we skipped agenda item 10, the task force liaisons recommendation.
Oh, sorry. So I have a different, sorry, I'm using the script. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, that might have been it. Sorry, that was that miss. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Yes.
Sure, let me share my screen really quickly. So at the last meeting, we discussed which liaisons you all were, or which advisory boards and commissions you all were interested in being liaisons for. We had a pretty substantial list, and I don't think, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Only partly, by the way, so we can only see like half of the.
Yeah, it's off center.
Got it. Is this better?
That's better.
Okay. So we, as staff, we wanted to, we don't want members, we understand the commitment that you all are making to the task force. And we want to make sure folks are being as realistic as possible. So we wanted to kind of divvy up the share of responsibility when it came to attending future advisory board and commission meetings. So this is just recommendations. We tried to diversify it based on the subcommittee groups that you all are already in. But if there are advisory boards or commissions that you are still interested in frequenting, then you're more than open to still attend those. We just wanted to make sure, usually when advisory boards and commissions have liaisons, they have a set number of commissions and advisory boards that they're interested in attending. You all are very ambitious, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we do just want to make sure that we're not overreaching. We're not asking people to do too much. So if everyone can kind of take a look at the recommendations, if there are advisory boards or commissions that you're still more interested in attending, feel free to let us know and we can notate that.
And just to level set on the expectation, I think the idea, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, John and Jasmine, but the idea is that we attend as many of these conversations as we can for both the advisory board and the commission that you're assigned to, and then as things pertain to social justice task force, you speak up in those forums, and then also if there are things that may inform some of the things that we're doing here, that you bring that back to us so we can understand what's happening from the larger picture perspective. Like, for example, there was a public safety report that just happened. It'd be great to get some insights from the public safety report, and maybe that might impact the way that we are thinking in terms of from a subcommittee perspective. So I don't know if I overstepped on that one, but that was my understanding of what the expectation is for being on this. And Jasmine and John, maybe you can help me out here.
So a couple of thoughts. I think that we may want to, because I believe that maybe there were a couple of individuals missing at the last meeting.
Okay.
I don't see everybody on this list. So I think we'll have to get all task force members onto the list.
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion would be that we select just one, either advisory board or commission for each person. I think that will be a more reasonable expectation of the number of meetings needed to be attending. And I think that in the first couple of meetings, it would be more of kind of a listening to see what that advisory board or commission is doing in terms of their work. I think the one thing we have to be just a little bit careful of is if a task force member is there and providing comment on items that are within the purview of the advisory board or commission, just making sure that that is representative of the full task force. Because when someone is there on behalf of the task force, we need to make sure that the full task force, or at least the majority of the task force, is supportive of the position or the comments being provided.
Okay, so when we speak, we are speaking on our own behalf. If we are speaking at another advisory board or commission meeting, that's important.
And I think the really important component of all this is to hear what's going on at those meetings and then report back to the task force if there are things that the task force member believes are relevant to everybody else. It's really meant to be kind of the eyes and ears of the task force so that, everybody knows what's going on at the other advisory board and commissions, and if there are things that the task force should get involved with. That's really the key component. We can also, one of the things we can work to do is ask each of the liaisons or the advisory boards and commissions to send us their minutes and to send us their information about the meeting so that we can provide that out to the task force as well. So that if you see something that is of interest, then we can follow up on that. But I would suggest that for our meeting in November, we get information from, I think it's the other two task force members that aren't on here, and then finalize in November, each task force member's kind of assigned advisory board and or commission.
Is it possible, I think last time we talked about this, to get the schedule of meetings?
Yeah, sure. Yes, let's send that out.
Okay. Thanks.
Excellent. All right.
On that, actually, just I just looked mine up. So they are on the West Hollywood City website. If you are like me and just want to make sure that you can commit. Yeah, so if anybody's curious, they are on the website.
And I think that Jasmine, let's put together like a nice one pager that just says, because they all meet once a month, so we know it's the second Thursday of each month for this one, or the second Wednesday, so we can do that for everybody.
And John, maybe just I might be a little bit more on the a more aggressive side, I think. But if we have people that just want to make sure all the commissions are covered, and all of the advisory boards are covered. So if there are some missing, I think it'd be great for us to maybe kind of recalibrate if that's the case. So
I think that's a good suggestion. What we can do is we can put forward recommendations for a single advisory board or commission for each person based on their interests and what they suggested. And then there will likely be a handful of advisory boards or commissions that aren't covered. And if individuals want to pick up a second one, if they feel that that's within their time constraints and it works for those specific days, then certainly that would be great.
And alternatively, right, they can always just read the minutes from the previous meetings or keep abreast via the packets, right? Even if they can't attend the meeting themselves. So.
Correct. I would recommend doing both of those things, reading the packet and reading the minutes. Right. Just from my experience, the minutes are pretty sparse for a lot of meetings. So you won't get the full flavor of what was discussed there. But certainly knowing in advance what some of the topics are, it may mean that somebody just wants to tune in for that specific discussion item and not the entire meeting, because some of the meetings just won't, or some of the meetings or items just won't be of any relevance to the task force.
Great.
I was just going to say quickly too, I know that most of our advisory boards and commissions are meeting via Zoom now anyway, so it provides a little bit more flexibility. If you're not necessarily able to attend the meeting on that day, you can always go back and watch if that helps.
And they're on YouTube, right? Also, so
most of them, yeah.
Both of them, yeah.
Yes, some are, but I wouldn't rely. Yes, most
don't
are
rely
on
on that as your fallback mechanism. Is that what you're trying to say?
Many are live, some are not archived. So I wouldn't have that be the fallback to watch it at a later time.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. All right. Any additional questions on this item? All right. So now we'll move on to agenda item number 11, which is items from staff. So
I don't have much. I just wanted to remind everyone to send over the authorization form in W-9s. If you haven't already done that, we want to make sure that you all are compensated for the work that you've done and the work that you're going to continue to do. So send that over to me as soon as you can, if you haven't already.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
I don't have anything to add.
Great. Thank you. And then, I mean, at this time, I guess we can adjourn our meeting. So we will see you on November 30th at 6 p.m. So full month. So happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween and Thanksgiving. Thanks, everybody.
And Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Have fun.